I didn't plan it at first. That's what I kept telling myself while I stood in the kitchen, watching people drift toward the door one by one, laughter fading into the hallway. But the truth is, I knew exactly what I was doing. I stayed on purpose. The party had been loud, messy, the kind where nobody really remembers who invited who. Music too loud, cheap drinks, bodies packed too close together. Jace had been at the center of it all, like usual, effortless, confident, talking to everyone like he owned the room without even trying. And me? I stayed just close enough to watch. Not obvious. Never obvious. I'd learned that the hard way. But I noticed everything: the way he tilted his head when he listened, the way his laugh cut through the noise, the way people leaned in when he spoke like they didn't want to miss anything. We'd known each other for a while. Same circle, same late nights, same random plans that turned into something bigger. But we'd never really been alone. Not like this. "Yo, Nicholas, you coming?" someone called from the door. I glanced over, forcing a casual shrug. "Nah, I'll stay a bit. Help clean up." That got a few laughs. No one believed me, obviously. I wasn't exactly known for being helpful at parties. But no one questioned it either. They were too busy leaving, already moving on to whatever came next. One by one, they disappeared. The music dropped lower. The apartment felt bigger, quieter. And then it was just us. Jace was in the living room, picking up empty cups, stacking them like he actually cared about the mess. He looked up when he noticed me still there. "You're still here?" he asked, a slight smile tugging at his mouth. "Yeah," I said, stepping closer. "Figured you might need help." He raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. "You? Helping?" I smirked. "Don't get used to it." He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. But he didn't tell me to leave. That was something. We moved around each other in that strange, quiet rhythm, throwing things away, straightening up, not really talking much. But the silence wasn't awkward. It was loaded, like something was waiting to happen, neither of us quite ready to name it. At one point, our hands brushed, reaching for the same bottle on the table. We both paused. "Sorry," I said automatically. "It's fine," he replied. But his voice had shifted, quieter now, more aware. Neither of us pulled away immediately. It was such a small thing. Nothing really. But it felt like everything at the same time. I cleared my throat, stepping back first. "So, good party." "Yeah," he said, watching me a second longer than necessary. It was. Another silence. This one heavier. He leaned back against the table, arms crossing loosely over his chest. "You didn't have to stay, you know." "I know." "Then why did you?" There it was. No jokes. No distractions. Just a straight question, hanging between us. I could have lied. Said something easy. Something safe. Instead, I shrugged lightly, even though my chest felt tight. Didn't feel like leaving. His eyes stayed on me, searching, like he knew there was more and was waiting to see if I'd say it. I didn't. Not yet. He nodded slowly, like he'd accept that answer for now. "Well, I appreciate the help." "Yeah," I said, softer. "Anytime." We finished cleaning faster than expected. The room looked almost normal again, like nothing had happened there at all. But something had. I could feel it. Jace walked over to the speaker and turned the music off completely. The silence that followed was immediate, almost too loud. Finally, he muttered. My ears were dying. I laughed quietly. "You were the one who put it that loud." "Worth it," he said with a grin, then glanced back at me. And just like that, it shifted again. No noise. No people. No distractions. Just him and me, standing in the middle of a room that suddenly felt too small. "You want a drink?" he asked, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Sure." We moved together again, slower this time. More aware. He handed me a glass, our fingers brushing again, this time not by accident. Neither of us acknowledged it, but neither of us rushed past it either. We leaned against the counter, a few feet apart. Close enough. "So," he said after a moment, swirling his drink slightly. "You've been kinda quiet tonight." Was I? "Yeah," he nodded. "You usually talk more." I shrugged. "Just watching, I guess." "Watching what?" I hesitated. "Everything." He smiled faintly, like that answer meant more than I was saying. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Hang back. Pay attention. Like you're trying to figure something out." I let out a quiet breath. "Maybe." "And you figure anything out tonight?" I looked at him then. Really looked at him. "Maybe," I said again. This time, the word felt heavier. His expression shifted, less teasing now, more serious. "About what?" The air between us tightened. I could feel my heartbeat picking up, loud in my ears. This was the moment. The point where I either stepped forward or backed off like I always did. I set my glass down on the counter. About you. That got his full attention. He didn't speak right away. Didn't move. Just watched me, like he was trying to decide if I was joking. I wasn't. What about me? He asked finally, voice lower now. I exhaled slowly. Why I stayed. And just like that, everything changed. Jace didn't react right away. That was the first thing I noticed. Not shock. Not confusion. Just stillness. Like he was holding himself in place, making sure he understood exactly what I meant before he said anything. About me, he repeated slowly. Yeah. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Inside, everything was loud, every thought, every what if, every possible way this could go wrong. He pushed himself off the counter, taking a small step closer. Not enough to invade my space, but enough to make it impossible to ignore the distance between us. And what exactly did you figure out? He asked. I let out a quiet breath through my nose. That I didn't want to leave. His eyes flickered slightly at that. That's not really an answer, Nicholas. I know. Silence again. Thicker now. More fragile. I glanced down for a second, then back up at him. I kept thinking, if I leave like everyone else, it's just going to stay the same. What's going to stay the same? This, I said, gesturing lightly between us. Whatever this is. That landed. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened just slightly. In the way his shoulders shifted, not pulling away, but bracing. You think there's a this? He asked, quieter now. I gave a small, almost humorless smile. You're really going to pretend there isn't? He didn't answer. And that was answer enough. I stepped a little closer, closing some of the space. Jace, we've been circling each other for months. His eyes snapped back to mine. That's not, he started, then stopped himself. It is, I said, not harsh, just certain. You know it. I know it. Everyone probably knows it except us. That's not true, he said, but there was no conviction behind it. Then why are we standing like this right now? I asked. He looked down briefly, then back at me. His expression had changed, less guarded, more exposed. Because you stayed, he admitted. Yeah. And you're saying things you don't usually say. Yeah. Another step. Now we were close enough that I could see the shift in his breathing. You don't just stay for no reason, he added. No, I said quietly. I don't. The air felt different. Charged, but not rushed. Like we were both aware that whatever happened next mattered. Jace ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. You could have said something earlier. I know. So why didn't you? I hesitated, then gave the only honest answer I had. Because I didn't know if you'd walk away. He looked at me for a long moment. I might have, he said. Yeah, I nodded. That's what I thought. Something softened in his expression at that. Not guilt, something closer to understanding. And now, he asked. Now you're still here. That pulled a quiet huff of a laugh out of him. Barely. But you are. We stood there, neither of us moving, both of us aware that the conversation had already crossed a line we couldn't uncross. Jace leaned back slightly against the counter again, but his eyes didn't leave mine. You ever think, he said slowly, that maybe there's a reason we didn't say anything before? Yeah, I replied. Fear. He gave a small nod. That and timing. Timing. Yeah, he said, glancing toward the empty living room. There's always people around. Noise. Distractions. It's easy to ignore something when you're never actually alone with it. And now we are. Yeah. The word lingered. I felt it settle between us, heavy and undeniable. No distractions, I added. Jace's gaze dropped briefly to my hands, then back up again. No distractions, he repeated. Another silence. But this one wasn't uncertain. It was deciding. You know this changes things, he said. It already has. And if it goes wrong? I held his gaze. Then at least we didn't pretend it wasn't there. He studied me like he was weighing that. Like he was trying to decide if I was worth the risk of everything shifting. What if I don't know what this is? He asked. You don't have to, I said. Neither do I. That's not exactly reassuring. I smiled slightly. It's honest. That got another quiet laugh out of him, softer this time. You've been thinking about this a lot, haven't you? Yeah. How long? I hesitated. Long enough that staying tonight wasn't an accident. That hit differently. I saw it in the way his expression changed, something deeper now, something more real. You planned this? He asked, not accusing, just surprised. I wouldn't call it a plan, I said. More like. I stopped avoiding it. He shook his head slightly, almost to himself. That's bold. Or stupid. Maybe both. We both smiled at that, but it faded quickly. Because the truth was still there. Unavoidable. Jace straightened slightly, like he was coming to a decision of his own. You're right about one thing, he said. What's that? We've been avoiding this. I didn't respond. I just watched him. And I don't think I want to avoid it anymore. My chest tightened at that. Yeah. I asked quietly. Yeah. Another step closer. Now there was barely any space left between us. I don't know where this goes, he continued. I'm not asking you to. And I'm not promising anything. I'm not asking for that either. He let out a breath, like that made it easier somehow. Okay. Okay. We stood there, both of us very aware of how close we were now. No one else around. No noise. No excuses. Just a choice. Jace glanced at my mouth for a split second, then back to my eyes. You're making this really hard to ignore, he said quietly. Good. That was it. That was the moment. Everything we hadn't said for months sitting right there between us, finally acknowledged. And neither of us stepped back. For a second, neither of us moved. It wasn't hesitation. It was awareness. The kind where you know exactly what's about to happen, and you let it happen anyway. Jace exhaled slowly, like he was grounding himself. If we do this, he said quietly, we can't pretend it didn't happen tomorrow. We won't, I replied. His eyes searched mine, like he was making sure I meant that. I'm serious, Nicholas. So am I. That seemed to settle something in him. Okay, he said, and then he closed the distance. We kissed. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't messy. It was intentional. Like both of us had imagined it before and were finally letting it become real. My hand came up to his arm without thinking, grounding myself just as much as him. He didn't pull away. If anything, he leaned into it slightly, like he'd been waiting for that too. When we pulled back, it wasn't far. Just enough to look at each other. Yeah, he murmured under his breath. I let out a quiet breath, half a laugh. Yeah. There was something different in his expression now. Softer, but also more certain. You've definitely been thinking about that, he said. Not just me. He smirked faintly. Fair. Another small pause. But this one wasn't awkward. It was steady. Jace glanced down briefly, then back up. This is where it gets complicated, you know. It already is. Yeah, he nodded. But now it's real. I leaned back slightly against the counter. Still close to him. Wasn't it always? He considered that. Yeah, he admitted. We didn't rush into anything else. That was the surprising part. After all that tension, all that build-up, it didn't explode into chaos. It settled. We stayed there, close, talking quietly like we were trying to understand what we'd just stepped into. How long? He asked after a while. Since when? Since you started thinking about me like this. I hesitated. A while. He tilted his head slightly. That's not an answer. I gave a small smile. Since I realized you weren't just being friendly. His brows lifted. And when was that? When you started looking at me like you knew I noticed. That made him pause. I didn't think you'd actually call me out on that, he admitted. I almost didn't. But you did. Yeah. He nodded slowly, like he respected that. I thought I was being subtle, he said. You weren't. That's embarrassing. I laughed quietly. Only if you regret it. He looked at me, really looked. I don't. The way he said it, it wasn't casual. It meant something. And I felt that land somewhere deep. We drifted back into the living room without really deciding to. The space felt different now, like it belonged to a different version of the night. Jace dropped onto the couch, leaning back with a quiet exhale. I sat next to him, not too close at first. There was a moment where neither of us spoke, just existing in it. This is weird, he said finally. Bad weird. No, he shook his head. Just new. Yeah. He turned his head slightly toward me. You okay with that? Are you? He thought about it. I think so. That's good enough for now. He smiled faintly at that. You're very one step at a time about this. I kind of have to be, I said. If I think too far ahead, I probably wouldn't have stayed tonight. That makes two of us. Another quiet pause. Then, more softly, he added, I didn't expect this from you. I glanced at him. In a bad way? No, he said quickly. Just, you're usually more careful. I still am. Doesn't feel like it. I smirked slightly. That's because you're finally paying attention. He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. Yeah, I guess I am. The room fell quiet again, but this time it felt comfortable. Not tense. Not uncertain. Just two people who had finally stopped pretending. After a while, Jace shifted slightly closer. Not a big movement. Just enough that our shoulders touched. Neither of us reacted to it. But neither of us moved away either. You know what the funniest part is? He said. What? If you hadn't stayed tonight, this probably would have gone on for months. Yeah, I said. That's exactly why I stayed. He turned his head toward me again, a small smile forming. So this is all your fault. I'm okay with that. He held my gaze for a second longer than necessary. Me too. That was the moment it really settled. Not just what happened, but what it meant. We weren't guessing anymore. We weren't avoiding it. We were in it now. And for the first time since I'd met him, there was no distance left to hide behind. We didn't talk about what we were. Not that night. Not the next morning either. And honestly, I think that's what made it feel real. There was no label to hide behind. No rushed definition to make it safe. Just whatever this was, unfolding in real time. I woke up earlier than him. For a second, I forgot. Then I felt it, the quiet presence next to me, the shift in the air that wasn't there before. Jace was still asleep, turned slightly toward me, one arm resting loosely across the space between us. Not touching, but close enough that it felt intentional even in sleep. I stayed still, just watching him. It was strange seeing him like that, quiet, unguarded. This version of him didn't exist at parties. Didn't exist around other people. This was something else. Something I wasn't sure I was supposed to see, but now I was. He stirred slightly, brow tightening for a second before his eyes slowly opened. It took him a moment to register. Then he looked at me. And just like that, he remembered. Morning, he said, voice rough from sleep. Morning. A pause. Not awkward. Just aware. You're still here, he added. I smirked faintly. Yeah. Disappointed. He huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head slightly. No. Just making sure last night wasn't some weird dream. Would have been a pretty specific dream. Yeah, he muttered, running a hand over his face. A little too specific. We both smiled slightly, but it faded quickly into something softer. Real. So, he said, sitting up slowly. This is where it gets complicated, right? I leaned back against the headboard. You said that last night too. Yeah, and I meant it. I know. He glanced at me, studying my expression like he was trying to figure out if I'd changed my mind overnight. I hadn't. I'm not going to pretend I have this all figured out, he said. I don't expect you to. And I don't want things to get weird between us. They won't, I said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. You sound very confident about that. I'm not, I admitted. I just don't want to ruin it before we even understand it. That seemed to land. He nodded slowly. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Silence settled again, but it didn't feel heavy. Just new. Jace swung his legs off the bed, stretching slightly before standing. You want coffee? Always. Good, he said, glancing back at me. Because I need something to make my brain work right now. I laughed quietly, watching him move around the room like this was normal. Like we hadn't just crossed a line that changed everything. And maybe that was the point. Maybe it didn't have to be dramatic. Maybe it could just be. The rest of the day was strange in a quiet way. Not awkward. Not tense. Just different. We moved around each other like we always did, talking, joking, existing in the same space, but now there was an undercurrent to everything. Every glance lasted a second longer. Every small moment carried more weight. At one point, we ended up sitting on the couch again, both pretending to watch something neither of us cared about. Jace shifted slightly closer, casual enough to pass as nothing. But I noticed. Of course I did. You're overthinking again, he said without looking at me. I glanced at him. What makes you say that? You get this look, he replied. Like you're trying to solve something. Maybe I am. Don't, he said simply. I frowned slightly. Don't what? Don't try to figure everything out right now. I leaned back, considering that. And just let it be? Yeah. I let out a quiet breath. You're surprisingly good at this. At what? Not overcomplicating things. He laughed softly. Trust me, I'm overcomplicating it in my head. I'm just not saying it out loud. Fair. Another pause. Then, more quietly, he added, I just don't want to mess this up. That caught my attention. This? I asked. He glanced at me, then away again. Yeah. I didn't push him. Didn't need to. Because the fact that he said it at all, that meant something. Later that evening, things shifted again. Not in a big way. Just enough to remind me that nothing about this was simple. We were back in the same apartment. Same space. But this time, people were coming over again. A smaller group. More casual. But still enough to change the atmosphere. I watched Jace as he moved through it, laughing, talking, slipping back into that version of himself that everyone else knew. Confident, easy, untouchable. And for a second, I felt it. That distance again. Not real distance, but the kind that creeps in when something that felt private suddenly has to exist in public space. Jace caught my eye from across the room, held it for a second, longer than he normally would, then looked away, like nothing happened. But it did. I felt it. And I knew he did too. Later, after most people had left again, though not completely like the night before, he found me in the kitchen. "You're quiet," he said. I shrugged lightly. "Just thinking." "About?" I hesitated, then decided not to lie. "This." His expression shifted slightly. More serious now. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." I leaned back against the counter. "Feels different when other people are around." He nodded slowly. "It does. Not in a bad way," I added quickly. "Just different." "I get that." Silence. Then he stepped a little closer. Not too close, but enough. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. I looked at him. "Yeah," I replied. "We will." And for the first time since that night, I realized something. Being alone with him had been the easy part. Now came everything else. The next few days felt steady. Not easy, not simple, but steady in a way I didn't expect. Jace didn't pull away. That was the first thing I noticed. After that second night, after the shift from private to something that had to exist around other people, I half expected him to retreat, to go quiet, to act like we'd crossed too far, too fast. He didn't. If anything, he stayed closer. Not in an obvious way, not something anyone else would question, but I felt it in the way he always ended up next to me. The way conversations seemed to narrow until it was just us, even in a room full of people. And in the quiet moments, there was no hesitation anymore. A few nights later, we ended up back at his place again. No party this time. No noise. Just us. It wasn't planned. It never really was with us. Things just happened. "You staying?" he asked casually, tossing his keys onto the table. I glanced at him. "You want me to?" He gave a small, almost amused smile. "You're really gonna make me say it?" "Maybe." He shook his head slightly, stepping closer. "Yeah, I want you to stay." That was enough. We settled into the couch like it was normal, like we'd done it 100 times before. But everything still felt slightly sharper, more intentional. Jace leaned back, one arm stretched along the back of the couch behind me. Not touching, but close. "You're doing that thing again," he said. "What thing?" "Thinking too much." I huffed a quiet laugh. "You say that like you're not doing the same thing." "I am," he admitted. "I'm just better at hiding it." "Not really." He turned his head slightly toward me. "Oh yeah." "Yeah," I said. "You get quieter. Maybe I just like the silence." "Maybe," I replied. "Or maybe you're trying to figure out what this is just as much as I am." That got him. I saw it in the way his expression shifted just slightly, but enough. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, that's fair." A pause. Then, more quietly, "You ever think we skipped a few steps?" I glanced at him. "Probably." "And that doesn't bother you?" "Should it?" "I don't know," he said. "Usually things don't start like this." "How do they usually start?" He smirked faintly. "Less intense." I smiled a little. "You don't seem like the type to do things halfway." "Neither do you," he replied. That lingered, because it was true. At some point, the conversation faded. Not awkwardly, just naturally. The kind of silence where you don't feel the need to fill it. Jace shifted slightly closer this time, not subtle enough to ignore. Our shoulders pressed together, and this time, neither of us pretended it didn't happen. "You good?" he asked quietly. "Yeah." "You sure?" I turned my head slightly toward him. "Are you?" He held my gaze for a second. "Yeah." And I believed him. We stayed like that for a while. No rush. No pressure. Just being there. And for the first time since all of this started, I felt something different. Not tension. Not uncertainty. Something calmer. Like we'd moved past the question of if this was real, and into figuring out what to do with it. "You know what's weird?" Jace said after a while. "What?" "This feels normal." I raised an eyebrow slightly. "Normal?" "Yeah," he nodded. "Like we've been here before." I thought about that. "I think we have," I said. He looked at me. "When? Just never like this." That made him pause. Then slowly, he nodded. "Yeah, that makes sense." Later that night, things shifted again. Not dramatically, just enough. We ended up sitting closer, talking quieter, the space between us disappearing without either of us pointing it out. At one point, Jace reached for my hand. Not hesitant, not rushed, just certain. I looked down at it for a second, then back at him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I didn't pull away. You're not making this easy, he said softly. I smirked slightly. You don't want it to be easy. He huffed a quiet laugh. Yeah, you're probably right. Another pause. Then, more serious. I just don't want this to turn into something we hide. That caught me off guard a little. Yeah. He nodded. Yeah. I studied him for a second. Then don't hide it. He met my eyes. And for the first time, there was no hesitation there. I'm not planning to, he said. And the way he said it, that mattered. Because this wasn't just about being alone anymore. This was about everything that came after. Later, when things got quiet again and the night settled around us, I realized something I hadn't expected. Staying that first night, that was the easy decision. This, whatever we were building now, this was the part that actually required something real. And for the first time, I wasn't the only one choosing it. The shift didn't happen all at once. It was subtle, the kind of change you only notice when you stop and look back at where things started. Because now, we weren't just something that existed in quiet moments. We were starting to exist in real ones too. It happened a few days later. We were out with the same group again, same people, same kind of night, same noise filling the room. On the surface, nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I watched Jace the way I always did, moving through conversations, laughing, completely at ease. Except this time, I wasn't standing on the outside of it. I was part of it, standing next to him, talking with him, not just watching. And still, there was that tension under the surface. Not bad, just unspoken. Like both of us were aware of something no one else could see yet. At one point, someone pulled Jace into a conversation across the room. I stayed back, leaning against the wall, half listening, half watching. Old habits. But then, he looked over, right at me, held my gaze. And instead of looking away like he used to, he didn't. It was small. No one else would have noticed. But I did. And so did he. Later, when things started to thin out, we ended up outside for a bit. Cool air. Quieter. Just enough distance from everything else. Jace leaned against the railing, exhaling slowly. I needed that. Too much? I asked. Not too much, he said. Just a lot. I nodded. Yeah. A pause. Then he glanced at me. You disappeared for a bit. I didn't disappear, I said. I was right there. Yeah, he said quietly. I know. There was something in the way he said it. Something different. You good, he asked. Yeah. You sure? I gave a small smile. You ask that a lot. Because I mean it. That landed. I looked at him for a second longer than usual. I know. Silence settled between us again, but this time it felt more open, less guarded. You ever think about how weird this is? He asked. What part? He gestured lightly between us. This part. I considered it. Not weird. Just unexpected. He huffed a quiet laugh. That's one way to put it. What would you call it? He thought for a second. Something I didn't plan. Yeah, I said. Same. Another pause. Then more quietly. But I'm not mad about it. He looked at me. Really looked. Me neither. That was when it happened. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just real. Jace shifted slightly closer, like he'd done 100 times before. But this time, his hand brushed mine. And instead of pulling away, he didn't. And neither did I. It was such a small thing. But it felt bigger than anything else we'd done so far. Because this wasn't hidden. This wasn't behind closed doors. This was real space. Real risk. Real choice. You're not subtle, I murmured. He smirked faintly. Neither are you. Fair. We stood there like that for a second longer than we probably should have. Then he said quietly, I'm done pretending this isn't happening. My chest tightened slightly. Yeah. I asked. Yeah. And the way he said it, it wasn't just about that moment. It was about everything. Inside, the noise picked back up. Someone called his name. Jace glanced over his shoulder, then back at me. For a second, it felt like the old version of him might come back. The one who kept things separate. The one who avoided anything that complicated his life. But he didn't. You coming? He asked me. Not you good here? Not I'll be back. Just, you coming? That was new. And it meant something. I nodded. Yeah. We walked back in together. Not touching. Not obvious. But different. Because now, I wasn't standing outside of his world anymore. I was walking into it with him. Later that night, when everything finally wound down again, we ended up back at his place. Same as before, but not the same at all. Jace dropped onto the couch, exhaling. Okay, that felt different. It was, I said. He looked at me. In a good way? I thought about it. Yeah. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I think so too. I sat next to him, closer this time without thinking about it. And this time, there was no hesitation from either of us. You know what this means, right? He said quietly. What? That we can't go back to ignoring it. I met his gaze. I don't want to. That was the truth. Simple as that. He held my eyes for a second longer, then nodded. Good. And just like that, whatever this was, it wasn't just something that existed when we were alone anymore. It was becoming something real, something visible, something we actually had to choose. And for the first time, we both were. After that night, there was no going back. Not in a dramatic way, not in a everything changes overnight kind of way, but in something quieter, more permanent. Jace didn't avoid me. That mattered more than anything. The next morning, there was no weird distance, no pretending nothing had happened. He was exactly the same except not really. Because now, when he looked at me, he didn't look away. You're staring again, he said, not even turning around from the kitchen. I smirked slightly. You're imagining things. Am I? He finally glanced over his shoulder, catching me mid-look. Okay, maybe not, I admitted. He shook his head, but there was a smile there. You're terrible at playing it cool. I'm not trying to. That's new. Yeah, I said. It is. We fell into something natural after that. Not defined, not labeled, but real. We started spending more time together without needing a reason. Not just parties, not just late nights. Normal things. Coffee runs, random walks, sitting in silence without it feeling like we had to fill it. And the more it settled, the more I realized something. This wasn't just tension anymore. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something steadier, something that didn't disappear when things got quiet. One evening, we were back at my place. No one else around. No noise. Just us again. But it didn't feel like that first night. It didn't feel uncertain. It felt familiar. Jace was sitting on the edge of the couch, scrolling through something on his phone. I was leaning back, watching him without really thinking about it. You're doing it again, he said. What? That look. I frowned slightly. What look? He glanced up at me, holding my gaze. Like you're trying to figure me out. I shook my head. I'm not. Then what? I hesitated, then said it anyway. I think I already did. That got his full attention. He set his phone down slowly. Yeah. Yeah. And he asked. I leaned forward slightly. You're not as sure of things as you pretend to be. He huffed a quiet laugh. That's not exactly a secret. And you don't like not being in control of something. Okay, now you're getting too accurate. I smiled faintly. And you almost walked away from this. That made him pause. Really pause. Yeah, he admitted. Why didn't you? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at me in a way he hadn't before. Not guarded, not unsure, just honest. Because it didn't feel like something I wanted to lose, he said quietly. That hit harder than I expected. I held his gaze. Even if it complicates things? He nodded. Especially because it does. Silence settled between us. But it wasn't heavy. It felt clear. Jace leaned back slightly, exhaling. You know what the difference is now? What? I'm not trying to ignore it anymore. I nodded. Yeah, I noticed. And you? I stopped pretending it wasn't there. That was it. That was the shift. Not just feeling something, but choosing it. A few days later, it got tested. We were out again. Bigger group this time. More people. More noise. More eyes. I felt it almost immediately. That pressure. That question sitting quietly under everything. What are we here? Jace was talking to someone near the center of the room. I stayed back again for a bit, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see what he'd do. Old pattern. New situation. And for a second, nothing happened. He stayed in conversation. Laughing. Relaxed. Just like before. Then, his eyes found mine. Across the room. Same as last time. But this time, he didn't hesitate. Hold on. I heard him say to whoever he was talking to. And then, he walked over. Straight to me. That alone was enough to make my chest tighten. But it wasn't just that. It was how natural it looked. How easy. You disappeared again, he said. I raised an eyebrow. I'm literally right here. Yeah, he said. I know. Same words as before. Different meaning. He stayed. Didn't rush back. Didn't act like he had to be somewhere else. And for the first time in a room full of people, there was no distance. Later that night, when everything calmed down again, we ended up outside. Just like before. Cool air. Quieter. Jace leaned against the railing, looking out for a second before turning to me. That felt different, he said. Yeah, I replied. Better. I nodded. Better. He studied me for a moment, then stepped a little closer. Not hidden, not careful, just real. I'm not going back to how it was before, he said quietly. I met his gaze. Good. And I meant it. Because now, this wasn't just something we found when we were alone. It was something we carried with us. Something that didn't disappear the second other people showed up. And that changed everything. Standing there with him, no noise, no distractions. I realized something simple. The night I stayed behind, that started it. But this was the moment it became something real. Something that didn't need hiding. Something we both chose. Out loud. After that night, things didn't explode into something dramatic. There was no big moment where we suddenly defined everything. No, what are we conversation under dim lights. It didn't need it. Because what we had started doing was simpler than that. We kept choosing each other. Days turned into something steady. Not perfect, not effortless, but real in a way that didn't feel fragile anymore. Jace stopped hesitating. That was the biggest change. Not in words, but in actions. He started showing up differently. If I was across the room, he'd find his way back. If we were with people, he didn't act like I was just another face in the group. Nothing over the top. Nothing that screamed for attention. Just consistent. And that consistency? It meant more than anything we could have said out loud. One evening, we ended up back where all of this started. Same apartment. Another party. Same noise. Same crowd. I stood near the kitchen, watching everything unfold. And for a second, it felt like I'd stepped back in time. Like I could see the version of myself from that first night standing there, unsure, waiting, deciding whether to stay. Only this time, I wasn't alone in that decision. Hey, I didn't even need to turn around. I knew it was him. Jace stepped up next to me, handing me a drink like it was the most natural thing in the world. You disappeared, he said. I smirked slightly. You say that every time. Because you keep doing it. I'm right here. Yeah, he said quietly. I know. Same words. Different feeling. I glanced at him. Feels weird being back here. Yeah, he admitted. It does. Different weird. Better weird, he said. I nodded. Yeah, better. We stood there for a moment, just watching everything. The noise. The people. The same energy that used to make everything feel complicated. But now, it didn't. Funny, isn't it? I said. What? This is where it started. He looked at me. You staying behind? Yeah. He huffed a quiet laugh. You really did plan that, didn't you? I told you, I said. I just stopped avoiding it. He studied me for a second, then nodded slowly. I'm glad you did. That landed. Simple, but real. Later that night, people started leaving again. Same pattern. Same slow fade of noise into silence. I felt it before it even happened. That familiar shift. Jace glanced around, then back at me. You staying? He asked. I smiled slightly. Yeah, I said. He nodded once. Like that was all he needed. And just like that, we were back where it started. Only this time, everything was different. The room was quieter. The space felt bigger. But there was no tension. No uncertainty. Just us. Jace leaned against the counter, watching me for a second. You know what's funny? He said. What? This doesn't feel like the first time anymore. I shook my head slightly. Because it's not. No, he said. I mean, it doesn't feel like something we just figured out. I understood what he meant. Yeah, I said quietly. It feels like something we finally stopped avoiding. He nodded. Exactly. Silence settled between us. But it wasn't heavy. It felt complete. Jace stepped closer. No hesitation. No second guessing. I'm glad you stayed that night, he said. I met his gaze. Me too. A small pause. Then, we're good, right? He asked. Not uncertain. Not afraid. Just checking. I didn't hesitate. Yeah, I said. We are. And that was it. No big declaration. No dramatic ending. Just something real. Because the truth was, it didn't start with that night. Not really. That night just gave us a reason to stop pretending. And everything after that, that was the part that actually mattered. We didn't rush it. We didn't label it. We didn't try to turn it into something it wasn't. We just chose it. Again and again. And honestly, that was enough.